Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 3, Monday Night Football edition. Some interesting results for us to unpack, and we'll get to all of them. Our good doc returns to break down all of the injury updates, and we look forward to a clash of the Titans, I say that facetiously, in the NFC East between the Giants and Cowboys. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, are you enjoying your Jewish New Year right now that's ongoing?
I am not going to pretend I know what you're talking about. Fill me in.
Oh, no, it's the Jewish New Year. It's Rosh Hashanah. It started last night into today, and since you're an honorary tribesman around these parts, I wanted to make sure you were enjoying your apples and honey after having worked with me since 2014.
Apples and honey, yes. I'm surprised you're joining us today.
You know, sometimes work responsibilities get in the way of your observance of faith. I'll have to work Monday Night Football. The show must go on. So for those folks that want to judge me, so be it. It is what it is. All right, my friend, another week of NFL football. Thank you, Jacksonville Jaguars and Los Angeles Chargers, for doing what we needed, keeping the first half under the total for all the loyal Bet the Board listeners. But as we always do on Monday morning,
that was work.
Oh, it took a lot of work. It shouldn't have taken work.
I mean, it was under
work.
24. It was a scoreless first quarter. I had literally had made the cocktail, and then all of a sudden, the Chargers just started turning the ball over.
It's amazing what happens that if you create short fields for your opponent in the National Football League, it's not always conducive for rocking chair unders. Unlike what we saw in Sunday Night Football, where it felt like every drive started inside the 3-yard line between the Broncos and 49ers. And I'm sure we will get to that game, but as we always do, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And since you and I are both the models of positivity in the sports gambling space, I want to know what caught your eye in a positive manner so far through Week 3.
Marcus Mariota. That Falcons offense is quietly putting up numbers with Arthur Smith running the show, and I don't think a lot of people realize that with all the noise from fantasy and prop betting experts on the internet yelling to the heavens about the lack of Kyle Pitts usage. But for 3 weeks now, Marcus Mariota has been dynamic, followed it up against Seattle. Now, I know that's not a competent defense. It's not one it's barely breathing and living. But Mariota, number one in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation for Week 3. 55% success rate. There was no dinking and dunking, which is kind of Mariota's MO, nearly 16 air yards per attempt on the season. Atlanta is number one in EPA per play. The offensive line we didn't think was very good coming into the season. Number 2 in pressure rate allowed. Obviously, Mariota helped some of that, and the things Arthur Smith's doing to move him out of the pocket assists in that, but still. But a very good offensive line, which is shocking, I think, for a lot of people that's covered that unit the last handful of years. I don't know if they can keep this up offensively because teams will eventually adjust and catch on. But, I mean, we're more than 17% of the way through the season, and Arthur Smith's offense is better than anybody expected.
If you'd have told me before the season started that the Atlanta Falcons were going to get dubbed a good in our Monday morning shows and the good, the bad, and the ugly before we got to, say, Week 6, I'd have told you were nuts. But when you watch that Falcons offense, tough to defend, especially yesterday. You saw Cordarrelle Patterson have a massive day opposite Marcus Mariota. You're seeing them get Drake London involved. And to your point, we finally got Kyle Pitts unleashed a little bit as he was targeted, I want to say, 4 times on the opening drive. So Arthur Smith,
off the milk carton.
Yeah, was sick of hearing the naysayers. They got him involved, but then it was Drake London that scored the game-winning touchdown late in that contest. So the Falcons offense a little bit more exciting than we thought they could be coming into the season. I'm going to take the low-hanging fruit here. It's going to be another bird of prey, and that'll be the Philadelphia Eagles. Second straight week, they've effectively ended a game before halftime. They've now taken a 17-point lead into the fourth quarter of every game this season. And what's amazing, Payne, to speak to their first-half dominance, they have yet to score a point in the fourth quarter so far this season. They've accumulated a grand total of 14 points in the second halves of games, and they haven't needed it. I mean, Jalen Hurts is putting up numbers that most quarterbacks would be envious of in the first half. That should be good for full game numbers. I know it hasn't been a murderer's row, but the Eagles are doing what you'd want a good team to do against inferior competition and ending their chances of survival early.
In a sport of attrition, why play 4 quarters when you can play 2.5? I mean, that's a good philosophy to adhere to. This is what it looks like when a good team plays in a down conference. The Eagles right now, number 1 in EPA per play on offense in the first half of games through 3 weeks. Number 2 in EPA per play on offense the first 3 quarters before they start shutting things down, as we're mentioning here. Philly hasn't played anybody too daunting. Certainly the Lions are playing hard and have made some defensive improvements on early downs. Offensively, Detroit's more aggressive and has some weapons. Minnesota, a little tick down manual adjustment on the road. And then Washington, we told you last week, is one of the worst teams in football. So Philly's doing what they're supposed to do against these teams. The Eagles' O-line is great. The weapons are plentiful. Jalen Hurts has certainly made strides as a passer, and his legs just give you nightmares as a defensive coordinator, I'm sure. But for the sake of the NFC, hopefully Green Bay and Tampa Bay can get a little bit healthier, because there's not much to like out of the NFC right now, especially if you're not using a ton of priors, which inflate the Rams and 49ers a touch.
Well, you mentioned Tampa and Green Bay, and I think a lot of people, when they saw that game on the schedule, week 3, you have 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks, you're hoping for high-flying offenses. Obviously, it couldn't have been any further from the truth. Both defenses go out there and effectively dominate. Green Bay scores touchdowns on their first 2 drives of the game before Tampa makes adjustments. Meanwhile, Green Bay, even playing a portion of the game without Jair Alexander. Are those 2 defenses as good as we saw yesterday, or is that more a byproduct of 2 offenses down a couple of weapons trying to figure things out as they go?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. I mean, both finished top 10 in EPA allowed so far this week. Now, you expected both defenses to play well. Right, I know the thought process from a casual bettor would be to look at that total and see Rodgers and Brady and assume, wow, how can this be in the low 40s? But there's a reason it was in the low 40s. I mean, Tampa specifically was just dealing with so many injuries. You just can't overcome them. I don't care who your quarterback is. Could be the greatest in the world, which Tom Brady is the GOAT. But third-string left tackle, backup rookie left guard, backup center who wasn't 100%. Your starting right tackle and Tristan Wirfs isn't 100%. Godwin and Julio were injured. Evans suspended. It was never going to look like the Mona Lisa offensively for Tampa. And I think the Packers' defense is better than what they showed in Game 1. That's very clear. And then all of a sudden you have to think about how these games are going to play out. If Team A does this, how does Team B react? And if the Buccaneers are going to struggle offensively, LaFleur and the Packers offense was never going to rush it. It's a run-first offense right now that plays like an absolute snail, and they were dealing with injuries to the wide receiver group as well, with Watkins and Watson out. Bakhtiari, Jenkins, and Tanyan are all playing, but trying to kind of get their sea legs back from significant injuries they've dealt with. So just too much to overcome offensively for both sides. And really, if you look at the Packers' success in the first half, I mean, I'm watching this game. I'm like, how many freaking 3rd and 5 pluses can they convert? It just wasn't sustainable, plus the adjustments you mentioned from Todd Bowles in the second half.
Yeah, and Green Bay even had a chance late in that half. Aaron Jones fumbling inside the 3-yard line for a game that was moving at a snail's pace. If Green Bay goes up 21-3 at that point, obviously it's good night, sweetheart. I don't think Tampa has a chance, and Green Bay continues to take the air out of the ball. But 2 teams that no doubt will be in the thick of the NFC race by the time we get to the end of the season. I have to ask, Payne, is Lamar Jackson's season right now reminiscent of one of our favorite Yankees in Aaron Judge, a player that bet on himself? He's putting up better numbers than he did during his MVP campaign from a touchdown production standpoint, working with what I would probably call below-average skill position talent around him. Lamar Jackson has taken this Ravens offense on his shoulder while the defense has truly struggled.
Some humans are built different. Eat all the popcorn, drink all the milkshakes you would like, because Lamar Jackson is absolutely humming right now, and he's hunting the deep ball. And he has been super efficient. And you mentioned, right, Mark Andrews is a very nice target over the middle, had 2 touchdowns again on Sunday against the Patriots. Duvernay is certainly providing a nice option. And then we've seen Bateman be explosive in the first couple of weeks as well. So the weapons aren't completely bottom of the barrel. The offensive line still dealing with injuries, specifically on the left side of the line when you're down to your third string left tackle. Dobbins did return, but he's just not 100% yet. So this has been a Superman-like performance, and through 4 weeks, Lamar Jackson, fourth among qualifying quarterbacks in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. He's doing it all.
And the Ravens, of course, will be involved in one of the marquee matchups this weekend as they'll play host to the Buffalo Bills, a game that we will preview extensively this coming Thursday in anticipation of Week 4. I know I've kind of stolen some of the thunder here with the good. Wanted to get your take on other things that stood out to you before we pivot a little bit into the inevitable bad.
I see you have the Dolphins on your good list. Why don't you start there, and then maybe I'll expound a little bit because I'm interested. When I saw your list, I was like, ooh, that's interesting.
So my take on the Dolphins has nothing to do with the way that the stat sheet looks. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I mean, the offense was clearly an afterthought in that game. They ran 39 plays in their win against the Buffalo Bills. It was the Buffalo Bills that controlled the game from start to finish. They had 90 offensive snaps. The Dolphins defense, though, from a yards per play standpoint, didn't allow Buffalo to pick up the chunk yardage, a far cry from what we saw against the Ravens. When you look at some of those numbers, the Bills counting stats significantly better than the Fins, but from a yards per play perspective, 5.5 to 5.4. And for me, I look at it, when you're in a division sometimes, you know that one team is perceived by odds makers, and rightfully so, to be superior. It takes a little bit to get that monkey off your back. And Miami had been dominated by Buffalo. Josh Allen had been an ATS freight train on the road. I think the numbers were 28-2 coming into the game yesterday. You look at this Buffalo team, they haven't won a game by single digits going back to the start of the 2021 season. That trend will continue. So I look for that to be a big win for a new head coach. But then, of course, you dig into the box score, and you can't paint with broad strokes. There are definitely things to be concerned about with Miami, and something that could manifest as early as Thursday on the short week.
Yes, I think it does manifest. I would say this was certainly a gutty performance from the Dolphins defense, surviving 90 snaps and 41 minutes on the field with temperatures that had a feel like 102 degrees when you factor in the humidity. It was a bend but don't break style, because if you look at Miami, of the 30 defenses that have played so far, they're 26th in success rate allowed. So it wasn't some dominating performance, but you coupled some poor decisions from Buffalo's offense along with some timely defensive stops by the Dolphins, and you look at the last 5 drives that Buffalo had. They reached the Dolphins 25, 6, 20, the 1, and the 43-yard line. Grand total of 0 points scored on those 5 drives. A little luck for Miami, obviously. Fatigue for Buffalo, and that was interesting. I don't necessarily think it was the full-blown strategy, but with 6 defensive starters out for Buffalo, it felt like the offense wanted to be a little bit more controlled to help the defense. And what ended up happening was the offense gassed out there on the field so much. You saw Josh Allen running around. He looked gassed. You had, offensive linemen that left the game for heat exhaustion. Diggs was in and out of the lineup. Gabe Davis obviously wasn't 100%. But I thought it was certainly a gutsy performance by the Miami Dolphins defense. So they do deserve a little bit of credit in those conditions for as many snaps as they faced, holding the Buffalo Bills offense, even if it was a little lucky, to 0 points in the second half.
Yeah, I think that was the big thing and takeaway for me. Obviously, if you look at the box score, we can't sugarcoat it. The Dolphins didn't deserve to win that football game 21-19, but every now and again, you need some of those momentum-building wins. There's obviously opportunities if the market shows inefficiency to go against those kind of things. But at the same time, hey, you win a game. Buffalo's got their hands full coming up against the Ravens, and suddenly, potentially at the quarter pole, if Buffalo's 2-2, Miami could be 3-1 or 4-0 going into Week 5. With the good, though, inevitably come the bad. And you know what? I'll kick things off in a negative manner here so you don't have to be the bad guy. I know they won the game outright, and they took a ton of professional money from a peak of 7 in the market all the way down to a closing number of 4.5. But for people that believe the Indianapolis Colts righted the ship with a win against the Kansas City Chiefs, it took a little bit of shenanigans, chicanery, and everything else for them to create a true home field advantage. But the offense, still a bit of a problem. Averaged just 3.8 yards per play, a mere 82 yards rushing. Jonathan Taylor, 125 yards rushing over the last 2 games. And you can't be fooled by the final score. They were gifted some of their 17 points.
Colts were very fortunate this week. Kansas City pissed down their leg and lost because of mental mistakes. Opening touchdown for Indy was 4 yards after Sky Moore couldn't field a punt. The next 2 scoring drives took 21 plays and went 88 total yards and ended with 2 field goals. And even the Colts' final drive yesterday required the Chiefs' defensive centerpiece making $80 million a year, or $80 million contract that he has, to lose his mind. I mean, there was a 3rd and 6 for the Colts on their own 39. Chris Jones sacks Matt Ryan. The two exchange displeasures with one another, basically, and Chris Jones gets an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty, and that gave the Colts new life and a new set of downs on the 46. But, you just look past this one game. Colts right now 31st in EPA per play the first 3 quarters through 3 games, and they've played Houston, Jacksonville, and the Chiefs defenses. And I understand some of those defenses are playing a little bit better than projected and expected, but those were 3 units that were all expected to be below average to start this season. This team is very, very fortunate to be 1-1-1, and maybe that luck helps propel them as they figure things out. Shaq Leonard appears like he's on his way back, but offensively, it's a little bit of a mess right now. And I don't know if there's a ton of fixing to this, which is just bizarre to me. I don't understand what I'm watching. Frank Reich has been a little bit conservative. The passing is really short. I mean, I like Michael Pittman, but they just didn't really move the ball deep down the field. I do think the Chiefs' defense is substantially better than we all thought. They're young, they're flying around, but that was an ugly performance yesterday. And what surprised me was, we can kind of be an open book a little bit here. Last Monday, we played the under 49.5, got to 46.5, and another group did not like that position, and hours later sent that back over 49.5, and then you had the upgrades to Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce, and eventually we closed 51. And you and I were watching this game, Todd, and we're like, are we really on the dead nuts under here? And we're going to get screwed because there's 24 points at the half on 202 total yards.
That was the first text I sent you. I go, I got to go back in and go under 25 in the second half, or 25.5 that was prevailing. And then you shot me a note. He goes, well, you already missed the 27 that one shop out west opened up.
You did miss it, and boy, did that not last.
I think that closed 20.
We snuck in ahead of you there.
That closed 24 shaded to the under at some of the sharper shops before the second half kicked off.
It did, yeah. That was a dead nut under. That did not have a prayer to go over, and honestly, the Colts should not have won that game, should not have covered that game.
Yeah.
So I don't know what I'm seeing there. I'm a little surprised, honestly. I think ultimately the defense, even though the parts feel like they've upgraded, right, with Ngakoue, and you bring in Stephon Gilmore at corner, who did exit a little bit with a hamstring injury yesterday for spurts, but did return late. God, I'm not like a massive Jonathan Gannon guy, but that defense hasn't been the same without that group. And I don't know if I really like Gus Bradley. Obviously, they played pretty well yesterday. They kept him in the game at times, but I don't know. There's something weird going on with that team that I'm shocked about.
Yeah, and suddenly the Colts and Titans, who will do battle on Sunday, in a pivotal matchup as they both are looking up at the Jacksonville Jaguars in the AFC South, at least through the first 3 weeks. All right, what else, my friend, caught your eye in the bad manner so far this week?
I like Scott Turner, and he does some good things, right? Uses lots of play action, motion rates are high. It just has not clicked for him in Washington's offense, and it's, I think, somewhat understandable, right? They've been playing musical chairs under center for the last couple seasons, but specific to the last 2 weeks, the game plans just have not worked. I mean, against the Lions and the Eagles, Washington has a negative 0.6 EPA per play in the first halves of both of those games combined. 18% of snaps have been successful in the first halves of those games. Carson Wentz has been successful on less than 11% of his first half pass attempts the last 2 weeks. And defensively, my understanding is, and I'm going to put this politically correct, the players in Jack Del Rio are not seeing eye to eye right now. So that team's a little bit of an abortion.
I mean, you know what? I mentioned that to somebody, and they kind of go, well, the Washington Commanders aren't going to make a change on the defensive side anytime soon. It's not how that organization operates. I'll tell you one thing. You may have been able to orchestrate a better defensive game plan than what we've seen from the Commanders in the first half each of the last 2 weeks. So brush up that resume, get things cleaned up, and we'll get you on there as an analyst in some capacity. Can I pick apart two quarterbacks who
That's a sinking ship, by the way.
The Commanders?
Yeah, there's no...
Yeah, I'm not sure where they...
organizational foundation there right now.
No, and I mean, there are some folks out there that have lived and died with the team who said they will never amount to anything with Daniel Snyder calling the shots. And clearly, when you look at the on-field product, it's nothing to get excited about. We'll see how their stadium deal, if they're able to get one done, unfolds, and what that means to the future of the organization. But it is not a bright outlook.
And I'm not a Washington hater. I'm a kid who played Little League Baseball. And on the back of your Little League Baseball card, you put your favorite player. You know who mine was?
Art Monk.
Art Monk. Yeah.
There you go. See?
So
I listen every now and again when you tell me useless nuggets about your childhood.
There we go.
Two quarterbacks, Payne.
Dick.
Two quarterbacks that got wins over the weekend who were underwhelming, and that might not be a strong enough word. Baker Mayfield and Justin Fields. We can start with Baker Mayfield. The Panthers, yes, they finally end, I think, what was a 9-game losing streak, but it had nothing to do with his performance. He hasn't completed more than 16 passes in a game this season. His last 2 games, he's completed less than 50% of his passes. Hasn't had a QBR greater than 17 over the last 2 games. His peak was 35, and that was largely because of the fourth quarter against his former team in the Browns. He doesn't look like he has confidence in the pocket. He's missing receivers that are wide open. He's not on the same page as his playmakers, and I think it's a big problem for Carolina going forward. And I also want to throw Justin Fields into a similar bucket. Third straight game with 8 or less completions for him. His season high is 121 passing yards. The coaching staff there won't even let him attempt more than 17 passes, yet somehow the Bears are 2-1. You know, Bill Parcells always used to say, you are what your record says you are. For the Chicago Bears, it's all about ground and pound. I'm not sure they have a quarterback that they can build around. And in Carolina, Baker Mayfield, nothing more than a glorified placeholder, at least for the first couple weeks of the season.
You sound like a DJ Moore fantasy owner.
I may or may not be heavily invested in DJ Moore and wondering if I have to send him out to the scrap heap.
Of the 30 quarterbacks that have played at least 50 snaps, Baker Mayfield is quarterback 30 in EPA plus completion percentage above expectation in the first 3 quarters. He has not picked up Ben McAdoo's offense, so what you're seeing with your eyes is spot on. He has not gelled with his pass catchers yet. And you start to think about his career to this point, he's certainly not being armed with an elite O-line and run game like he was during the peak performances with the Browns. And yesterday, I get it, right? Division game, it's a grinder. The total's low. You're not expecting an offensive outburst by any stretch, right? There's a lot of familiarity. But there was no excuse. Baker Mayfield was pressured on only 17% of his dropbacks. And to have a completion percentage 16% below expectation, that's not acceptable. And really the only splash play of the offense was Chenault's 67-yard touchdown, which came on a play where Baker threw it behind the line of scrimmage. You mentioned the yardage per play. You back that one play out. I mean, it is bleak. And I know you have a bunch of Bears friends, so we can touch on Justin Fields quickly. I still think he's got plenty of talent. I think if this doesn't work out in Chicago, someone smart is going to pick him up and use him wisely.
I agree.
He still has deficiencies, right? Make no bones about it. Justin Fields has deficiencies. Sometimes he's has issues getting to second and third progressions. It's something we saw at Ohio State. It's something we saw a little bit at Georgia, right? But this, to me, is a combination of new system, a staff that doesn't want to throw the ball and put it in Fields' hands. They're not really putting him in a position to succeed. I understand some weather elements. I understand the ground game has actually been efficient, but they are the number 1 team and passes below expectation. They're just not throwing the ball. They have a shoddy offensive line, a shoddy receiver group. You've dealt with multiple weather games, but in that same metric that I mentioned Baker Mayfield in moments ago, Justin Fields is quarterback 29 out of 30 in EPA plus completion percentage above expectation through 3 quarters the first 3 games. So it needs to be better.
Anything else before I start to feel real dirty and like a negative Nancy that you wanted to highlight for the bad before we get into the potentially ugly category?
No, let's transition there.
Sunday Night Football for underbettors, obviously an absolute Picasso. First half, full game, whatever you want. If you're a fan of special teams, specifically punters, you saw these groups pin their respective opponents inside the 3-yard line. It felt like countless times throughout the game. But from a quarterback play standpoint and offensive execution, Russell Wilson and Jimmy Garoppolo left an awful lot to be desired, and a far cry from a game we saw years ago between these very same quarterbacks, Week 17 for the division, when the Seahawks came up 1 yard short. Back to the drawing board for both the 49ers and Broncos. The bigger concern for the 49ers, Trent Williams left the game on a cart, the most talented left tackle in the game. We'll see if he's able to go for Monday Night Football against the Rams.
High ankle sprain for Trent Williams is what the head coach is saying. So we'll see ultimately what unfolds there. I'm a little upset about that game on Sunday Night Football. I kind of hinted when we broke it down, our model was indicating under. But there is a group that has bet Denver overs back-to-back weeks now. I've wanted to play them under. I don't understand it. But what we saw from Jimmy Garoppolo was piss poor. He kind of returned to the negative variance Jimmy Garoppolo. Offensively, Russ is still taking forever, still not taking what the defense gives him. Nathaniel Hackett really didn't have much of a clue again last night, despite getting help. They hired help with some of the decision makings to allow him to be free and think free offensively, and it just wasn't very good. But we mentioned that, right? Nathaniel Hackett had kind of struggled offensively against the San Francisco 49ers when he was in Green Bay, and certainly there was like a performance or two that was good, but overall, you go back to some of those performances, Todd, where Aaron Rodgers and that offense would just get stifled by the 49ers defense. So it doesn't stun me completely that transpired again here with a much weaker unit that's still kind of learning this new system in Game 3 of the season.
Yeah, a little bit of a problem there, but they weren't the only ones that struggled offensively. I think the Saints calling it bad would be a little bit problematic. I'll call it ugly for what we saw unfold yet again. New Orleans dealt with a laundry list of injuries during the game. Jarvis Landry leaves, Michael Thomas leaves, Andrews Pete leaves. Taysom Hill missed the game with a rib injury. For the second straight week, New Orleans doesn't score their first touchdown until the fourth quarter. If it's not for the fourth quarter against the Falcons, I mean, this team's offensive numbers are downright ghastly. They've scored a grand total of 38 points in the fourth quarter this season, 17 of which came against Atlanta. Meanwhile, through 3 games in the first 3 quarters, they have scored 13 total points. Jameis Winston isn't right. I'm not sure a trip to London will be the cure-all for the Saints, but clearly this is a team that's got to figure things out and do so in a hurry, knowing that Tampa is going to get right and get healthy amid some of their offensive struggles early.
I think you're pretty spot on there. Ultimately, the Saints were a spot that we had circled getting 3, but the injuries are very difficult right now. And it looks like someone was willing to grab that 3. But you're looking, the first thing's obvious, right? We all know Sean Payton is an offensive genius, and that's being confirmed again. Pete Carmichael hasn't been great, but I think it's tough because they're decimated by injury. We knew the O-line would take a step back without Teron Armstead. You went out, drafted Penning. He's injured. Michael Thomas is working his way back, didn't have a full snap share, left the Panthers game again early. Jarvis Landry left the Panthers game, didn't return. Andrews Pete left the game, didn't return. Jameis Winston's playing with multiple fractured ribs. Alvin Kamara is playing injured. Taysom Hill didn't play. This is the combination of losing an offensive mastermind in Sean Payton and being crushed by the injury bug. And all told, through the first 3 quarters, you mentioned the point totals. I mean, in terms of efficiency, 31st in EPA per play the first 3 quarters through 3 weeks. It is ugly right now for the Saints offense.
Yeah, my eye test didn't tell me it was going to be a Picasso or a hidden gem that we get uncovered with New Orleans, so we'll see if a change of scenery can get the ship righted in a matchup that'll be relatively interesting as the Vikings will look to try and build on their impressive comeback against the Lions, and the Saints will try and fight to get to 500 as we talk about that London game. Anything else ugly-wise that you'd like to highlight before we get out of this category and talk a little look-ahead numbers?
Let's get to the look headlines.
All right. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And look ahead numbers, we can kind of go rapid fire. And we've seen some movement starting as early as Thursday. The Bengals were 1.5-point favorites throughout the market. The Bengals now up to a full field goal favorite as they'll welcome in the Miami Dolphins.
I think it's best just to be straightforward here, Todd. I mean, Todd and I laid one last night, and it comes back to what we discussed about the Miami Dolphins defense. They were on the field for 90 snaps in what felt like 102 degrees. They were on the field for nearly 42 minutes. They're 3-0, right? They slayed the dragon that was Buffalo, a team that's given them issues the last few years. And you think about the energy that was spent the week prior, right? Coming back from 21 in the fourth quarter against Baltimore, and now you're on a short week and you have to travel 1,200 miles. Cincinnati's certainly the more desperate team below 500. And the other interesting thing is, saw the total get hit a little bit this morning, under 48.5, and it's taken a few books to the key of 47. Our model is a little lower on this, but the reason we didn't bet under is because of the Dolphins' defensive fatigue, and weirdly, Miami's offense might actually be pushed here because of that. Miami's offense has been really efficient. Make no bones about that. If you look at virtually any efficiency metric, they're really, really good. But to this point, Mike McDaniel seems to be playing to game state almost. And that's bizarre. Like, he just doesn't come out of the shell right out of the gates. Whatever the opponent is doing, he seems to be like matching it offensively. It's like, just uncork this thing already.
Hey, maybe he's got a master plan that he's looking to unveil and not peel back the curtain completely for what some of those weapons can do. We've seen a balancing act obviously taking place in the backfield. We know about what they can do in the passing game, but this definitely feels like a challenge. Good to know, though, that in the wake of Tua potentially having a concussion, the official diagnosis was back spasms for those folks that watch the game, as the NFLPA will launch an investigation for how all of that was handled. When we talk about Miami and their big win against Buffalo, we've seen the market respond in a very interesting fashion for the Bills this coming Sunday. They were projected to be, or they were 4-point favorites on the road at Baltimore. We're now looking at Buffalo now only a field goal favorite. And we talked about how Buffalo was the better team for the extended stretches versus Miami. The scoreboard told a different narrative for what the stat sheet indicated.
I zoned out there as I look at the screen. Did you say Bills, Ravens?
Yes, Bills, Ravens from a 4 down to 3.
I'm watching the market move here, and I got a little distracted. I think this is more an injury thing, right? 6 defensive starters were out for Buffalo last week. I don't know how likely they are for this. Their starting center, Mitch Morse, was also out, and then you had the starting tackle, Spencer Brown, leave the Dolphins game as well. Gabe Davis isn't 100%. Diggs was dealing with an in-game injury, and he was in and out of the lineup, and Baltimore's 3-0, if not for blowing that 21-point fourth quarter lead that we just mentioned to the Miami Dolphins. And Lamar Jackson's playing at an MVP level, so it doesn't completely stun me when you combine both of those elements that we've seen this tick down a little bit.
I'm glad you could focus on the NFL while you're watching NHL preseason line moves steam this early on a Monday morning. I know where your bread is buttered, so I don't want to interrupt any of that for you. Cards and Carolina Panthers, a dumpster fire of a game on so many levels, my friend. Arizona was a 2.5-point road favorite for the trip across the country to Charlotte. Arizona struggles in losing 20-12 against the Rams. Carolina dispatches the New Orleans Saints 22-14, and here we are. Without a move through key numbers, it obviously changes the teaser vehicle, so to speak, with Carolina a modest 1-point home favorite.
Thought Arizona played well in defeat yesterday. But prior to yesterday, I mean, the Cardinals metrically were one of the worst defenses in the NFL, and the offense had done absolutely nothing in non-garbage time situations. Literally, prior to the game against the Rams, and I know they lost it and didn't cover and didn't exceed odds-maker expectation, but it was oddly probably one of their better performances of the season. That's wild to say, but again, like going into yesterday, I think they were 31st in non-garbage time EPA. Just horrific on both sides of the ball. This is a step down in class for Arizona, though. That's one thing you do have to think about here. I mean, played the Chiefs, played Super Bowl winning the Rams. I understand that the Raiders are 0-3 right now, but probably deserve to be a little bit better than that. This, the way Baker Mayfield is playing, and the offensive output they had last week, this is certainly a step down in class. And at least in the Cliff Kingsbury era, the one element that has been very good for him is, for whatever reason, when they hit the road, they seem to play a little bit better.
Road underdogs, Arizona Cardinals. They've been phenomenal in that in that particular spot. As you indicated, they were undefeated in it last year, and they're already 1-0 ATS on the highway this season, winning outright against the Raiders in improbable fashion. Last but not least, this game moved mainly because of injury. You had Green Bay, who will welcome in the New England Patriots, 6.5-point favorites on a look-ahead number. We're now upwards of 10.5, and I even see the first 11 in the market. Mac Jones, very, very doubtful, hasn't officially been ruled out with a high ankle sprain, but 6.5 to 11, Green Bay hosting New England.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. You have the Mac Jones downgrade, which candidly I thought I was a little high. I thought it was like 3.5, 4 points relative to the backup. New England does also have some holes with its roster construction that are just now evident to everybody. Green Bay significantly better than its week 1 performance. And that's really why we've seen this uptick, is that Green Bay is better than people thought after their week 1 performance, which we kind of told you, like, hey, there were some things here where they were uber efficient doing X, Y, and Z. They had a couple unfortunate breaks. They had a couple unfortunate drops. Like, they deserved, I'm not saying to beat the Vikings in week 1, but certainly appear better. And they went out and handled business with the Bears and got out to a very early lead against the Buccaneers and looked like the superior team there. So you do give the Packers a little bit of an upgrade, and then you drop the Patriots down for their performance really throughout the course of the season. I mean, they're like, wow, that was a great performance. I mean, I think if the game played 5 quarters, they probably lose to Pittsburgh too, the way that thing was trending.
Yeah,
obviously the Mac Jones drop off.
Yeah, unless that drive that they put together to close out the Steelers could have lasted, instead of just 6.5 minutes, it could have lasted 16.5 minutes, might have been their only shot to officially slam that door. It just is interesting and a little bit jarring when you consider, you mentioned the drop-off from Mac Jones to most likely Brian Hoyer, and we hit the rewind button. Green Bay closed a 10-point favorite against a divisional rival in Chicago. I'm not sure, even with Brian Hoyer under center, that the Bears are 1 point better, so I'm curious to see where this market...
I would agree, yes.
Where this market will ultimately settle. By the way, NFL schedule makers, Payne, as I'm just looking at it now, did us no favors. We have 9 early kickoffs next week. That doesn't include the 6:30 a.m. Pacific, 9:30 Eastern London kickoff. Only 3 games taking place in that 4 Eastern window or later. It'll be interesting to see how those games get bet between New England, Green Bay, Denver, the Raiders, and the one that kicks off 20 minutes before that between Arizona and Carolina. Reminded all of you to follow Payne on Twitter, at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Also, follow the podcast at Bet the Board. But most importantly, you need to follow the smartest man that we brought into the Bet the Board family for this NFL season.
Are you injured or are you hurt?
When injuries occur in the NFL, you need someone to call on.
If you're hurt, you can still play. If you're injured, you can't.
Let's check in with Dr. Deepak Chona, Stanford and Harvard-trained orthopedic sports surgeon and founder of Sports Med Analytics, the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis.
So are you hurt or are you injured?
I am pumped today and every week this season to be presenting your Bet the Board injury update for week 3. We got a lot to talk about, so we will dive right in, starting with Mac Jones. Now, video looked pretty bad, x-rays were negative, MRI will happen today, very likely dealing with a high ankle sprain. And depending on severity, these can average 4 to 6 weeks for position players. Quarterbacks can often push that timeline up a little bit, closer to the 2 to 4, and come back a little hobbled, but especially pocket quarterbacks can still play. There is either way very likely a multi-week absence here. Again, we'll know more about the severity after the MRI, and we're not totally out of the woods on whether or not he needs surgery yet. Next up is Dalvin Cook. Now, Cook dislocated his shoulder again. This is really bad news in my eyes for his season. He had an unrepaired tear in the labrum of his shoulder, and the labrum basically serves as a bumper cushion that adds stability to the shoulder. So with that being torn, it was probably already slightly greater risk for instability and dislocation to begin with, but now when he's dislocated again, you're very likely worsening that existing tear, making the shoulder in turn more unstable. Now, it usually takes 1 to 2 weeks to bounce back, and he may even get back for the next week without a huge performance drop-off, but there's a very high chance that this pops up again in season. I'm going to be investing big in Alexander Mattison anywhere I can. Next is J.K. Dobbins. Now, I love to see him back. 9 touches is about what we expect from a young running back coming off of this type of multi-ligament knee surgery. Usually the ramp up takes about 4 games, so I'm expecting the training wheels to come off somewhere around week 7 or 8. When you factor in the typical performance dip with this surgery, but then also Dobbins' athletic metrics and production, our data suggests the second half of this season is when we should anticipate him looking like about 85% of the old Dobbins. Today's workload suggests he's very much on that track. Again, I wouldn't put too much into his roughly 3 yards per carry. Just the fact that he's getting touches, is out there and not getting re-injured and not limping, that's a win for today. Next is Tua Tagovailoa. A lot of controversy on this one. It looks from reporting by Ian Rappaport that this wasn't actually a concussion concern. It sounds more likely that back spasms were the issue, and that does make sense based on the way he sort of collapsed on the video. Most commonly, quarterbacks can get these under control in season. There is a recurrence risk, but for a pocket quarterback, missing time is relatively uncommon, and having a major drop-off in production is also relatively uncommon. So I would say for Tua Tagovailoa, overall looking positive. Next is Michael Thomas. They're reporting a foot injury. We don't have a lot of details on it so far. We can say 2 things. One is that he was testing it before going into the locker room. That suggests to us a relatively mild severity. And then the second is that they did mention in one report that it may have been a toe injury, probably in that case dealing with turf toe. And for the typical case of turf toe, wide receivers are missing 0 to 1 game. So we're going to have to stay tuned on this one. I suspect a low severity injury, probably eligible to play this coming week, but we'll know a little more from practice reports. Next up is David Montgomery. Now, the video looked like a mechanism for a high ankle sprain. They are calling him day-to-day already, so we'd suspect we're looking at 0 or 1 game missed. Now, if I had to bet, because they're also saying he had a knee issue as part of this injury, I would say he misses 1 week, but we'll know a lot more, but again, by how he practices Wednesday and Thursday. Next is Justin Herbert. Really, really impressive for anyone who understands the pain that he was probably in, and you could see on his face that he was getting worse every time he took a big hit and landed on those ribs. Now, the fact that he played the entire game and was able to even fling the ball a little bit, I am very encouraged by this. It's only going to get better. It's going to take probably about 4 weeks before he's really feeling well, but even next week and the week after, you're looking at Justin Herbert probably being more comfortable out there and being slightly more mobile each time. So I'm overall encouraged by what I saw today. Next, unfortunately, Joey Bosa, not so encouraging. The video and his reaction suggests a high grade 1 or low grade 2 groin strain. And for reference, that's the same type of injury that took George Kittle about 3 weeks to get over. Usually for a defensive player, this means 2 or 3 games missed. We'll know a little more after an MRI this week. And then similar to Joey Bosa, Jair Alexander has also started dealing with a groin injury as of yesterday. On Alexander, we can potentially gain some insight from the amount of time between when he left and when he was ruled out. The fact that there was a lag there suggests overall moderate severity. Again, we're looking at usually 2 to 3 weeks of recovery on average. I'd very tentatively lean towards the 2 for Alexander if I had to pick today. And that does it for today's Bet the Board injury update. I am Dr. Deepak Chona with SportsMed Analytics. If you like what you're hearing or you just want to have the winning edge, hit me with a follow on Twitter at SportMDAnalysis or Instagram at SportsMed Analytics. Until next time, back to you, Todd.
Thanks, Deepak. Excellent breakdown, as always, for the injuries, and a perfect segue, more or less, from our Green Bay, New England dialogue into the Mac Jones injury and how long he could potentially be sidelined under center. Deepak Payne talked about a couple of running backs. Dalvin Cook, dislocated shoulder. J.K. Dobbins slowly ramping up. David Montgomery, how quickly he could return for the Bears. And while we talked about the Bears, I never want to root for injury, and I don't. I want to see all players out there. I wonder if it's addition by subtraction if Khalil Herbert takes on a bigger workload, as he seems to be the more explosive back, even in the performance David Montgomery turned in against the Packers.
I think our loyalist of listeners, and there's probably a lot of them right now if you're listening to a Monday show, we've been pounding the table for Khalil Herbert for 2 seasons now. He's certainly the more dynamic back, and it seems he's a little bit choppier as a runner, which has worked well with some of these weather conditions because he's been the substantially better runner in the rain games as well. I just think he's a more complete back. I do wonder if Montgomery becomes trade bait once he becomes a little bit healthier.
It's interesting. And by the way, I see why you got distracted by the screen as these numbers are moving. Nothing like the good old Monday dummy in college football games across key numbers, but I digress completely there. The one other thing
The other guy, by the way, you mentioned Dalvin Cook.
Yes.
That relationship is starting to sour. So let's see how that transpires over the next 12 months.
A little bit of damaged goods there. You wonder exactly what the workload will look like. Alexander Mattison, we've talked about at great lengths, being a very capable backup running back, especially if put in the right scheme. And, Kevin O'Connell coming from that Rams coaching tree, we know running backs have become interchangeable pieces. So definitely a situation that bears watching. The last one that I wanted to touch on ever so briefly, because we didn't actually get into it at the top of the show, and I felt this might be a more logical place to discuss it. Justin Herbert, an absolute warrior, went out there, gutted it out against the Jacksonville Jaguars, but clearly wasn't 100%. We talked about it early in the week. The market dipped as low as 3. We saw it close 6.5. But that Chargers team now goes on the road against the Houston Texans. I don't know if you sit Herbert now, if you played him last week, but it leads me to believe that they're going to have to figure out exactly what Herbert feels comfortable doing going forward until that rib cartilage is healed up.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not an injury that's pleasant to deal with. And Deepak, I believe, mentioned it last week, and this is worse than broken ribs because broken ribs suck but heal much quicker. And with the broken rib cartilage, the understanding is that can last multiple weeks, if not multiple months. And when you heard Justin Herbert took an injection shot to practice this week, and then again on game day, and the Chargers are being very cautious with this because they're being sued for about $8 million right now from Tyrod Taylor for puncturing his lung under the same practices. They were going to put it under a microscope to give him this injection. It's ultimately up to him. But one thing that we have seen with this injury, and there's some data out there from a lot of people that are smarter than me, but ultimately quarterbacks miss roughly a game and a half with this injury. And I know he had 10 days, but he was out there. He was extremely limited. And the performance after returning from that missed game and a half on average, you see about a 25% decrease in performance. I think it was actually worse yesterday.
Yeah, I'd agree.
And it was combated, though, with the other ancillary injuries that we talked about and the reason we went under. I mean, you had Corey Linsley, your starting center, out. He is all world. And that's the guy that can potentially help you when your quarterback isn't 100%. We saw Rashawn Slater go down with a bicep injury. That's one of the premier left tackles this league has. Let's keep an eye out on that injury. Trey Pipkins, right tackle. Your security blanket and Keenan Allen did not play. So this wasn't just Justin Herbert trying to overcome this injury. Right now, that offense is dealing with a slew of injuries. And then you saw Joey Bosa leave the game as well. That was a dynamic duo at rush ends paired with Khalil Mack that we thought was going to be a force. Let's see how long Joey Bosa's out for.
Yeah, that was one thing that surprised me, honestly. If your offensive line is a fortress and you have full health there, okay, you can bring Justin Herbert out, but we saw how much different the protections changed even before Herbert got hurt. Once Linsley left the game against Kansas City, and heart and toughness is always good, but sometimes organizations need to protect the player from themselves when your aspirations aren't beating the Jaguars week 3, but trying to keep the face of your franchise healthy to potentially win a division going forward. But alas, the Chargers fall to 1-2. They'll be on the road, a chance to avenge an ugly, ugly loss, arguably the one that kept them out of the playoffs last year against the Houston Texans this coming Sunday. All right, my friend, final order of business. We do have a Monday Night Football game to get to, one that has been on the move, and we're looking right now at the Giants, a 1-point favorite. Consensus total on this one, 39 as well. A potential whiteout game brewing in MetLife Stadium, meant to help change the culture. Some interesting comments from Saquon Barkley, said it got him nostalgic for his time at Penn State. If the Giants do indeed close favorites in this game, Payne, it would be the first time they're favored over the Dallas Cowboys since the final week of the 2018 season. Eli Manning, not Chad Powers, was the starting quarterback for the Giants back then. Could also be the first game that the Giants will close as a favorite since Week 3 versus the Falcons last season. They closed as a 1-point underdog last week as that number moved through the 0. Brian Daboll seeks his first 3-0 start from a rookie head coach since 2009. Since Dan Reeves did it in 1993. First 3-0 start for the Giants since 2009. So many interesting aspects. The Cowboys not nearly as desperate as they got the outright upset of the Bengals last week. For me, I think the number is probably the most fascinating part of this game. I don't know there's a ton of X's and O's to dig into, but I don't want to steal any of your thunder.
I don't love talking about games that have moved this much. Clearly, the Cowboys are the sharp side. We saw the new school bettors who potentially don't need a ton of money to get down in the market initially created this wave, and then Monday, this basically went from Cowboys +3 to 1, and now we're basically down to pick 'em. And I think it's matchup predicated, right? First of all, the Giants really haven't played anybody, and both of those games were coin flips, right? I mean, they were down double digits to the Titans. They did not look very impressive against an unimpressive Carolina team either. I think just kind of grazing both sides of the ball here quickly, like the Cowboys offense versus the Giants defense feels like it has a ton of variance to it in that the Cowboys are not hitting explosive plays offensively. The Giants are giving up explosive plays in bushes. So I don't know what that looks like, right? 24% of completions allowed against the Giants have been explosive. We know Cooper Rush might not be the best, despite what Jerry says about him, but he's at least willing to push it a little bit. We know Wink Martindale wants to send heat. He loves to blitz. And through a limited sample size, Cooper Rush this season has been very good against the blitz. 146 passer rating, a 9.5-yard ADOT. He's willing to push it, right? 90% adjusted accuracy. Again, very small sample, but he's at least shown well against the blitz, and that's what we think Wink is going to do. The other element of the variance on this side of the ball is the Cowboys are converting on third downs at a 24% clip, third worst rate in the league. The Giants defensively, I know it's only against Tannehill and Baker, they've been able to get opposing offenses off the field on third down, 21% conversion rate thus far. That's the best in the league. So the Cowboys bad third down offense, Giants great third down defense. That is a very much variance metric. Let's see what transpires with Dalton Schultz from now until kickoff. You also have Leonard Williams, who's got the sprained MCL. He looks like he is out this evening, Todd. That's kind of
it looked
the
like
way
it was
that's
trending
trending.
that way. Haven't seen an official designation there, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I mean, to me, this specific side of the ball has far more variance when you think about, can the Cowboys create some explosives? That's something the Giants have been very vulnerable and susceptible to, but the Cowboys don't really have that type of offense right now, and then you have this massive third down variance from both teams. So I don't really see a ton on that side of the ball. I think the other side of the ball is a little bit interesting if we just want to touch on that for a minute.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was going to even simplify that side of the handicap. Do the Giants have the pieces along the offensive line to neutralize the potential game-wrecking impact that Micah Parsons has been known to have?
That is really the question, I think, and that's partly why we've seen this Cowboys steam take shape is this specific side of the ball. The Giants are playing in a phone booth right now, and they don't have any explosiveness. The receiver group is not good. Wan'Dale Robinson's out. Kadarius Toney is trending the same way, and because that receiver group can't separate, Daniel Jones is holding on to the ball for an eternity, 3.2 seconds, second longest time to throw in the NFL, and that's allowed him to be pressured on 54% of dropbacks, and it's not allowing him to push the ball down the field. So the Cowboys are likely to get real pressure here. And without Robinson and Toney as the safety valves, it's probably Saquon Barkley getting a bunch of those dump-offs to combat that pressure. His usage rate has been through the roof. 78% of the team dropbacks, Saquon Barkley's been on the field. So I would think that he's got a role in the receiving game. And because of those questions in the pass game, I think the Giants also have to try to run it here a little bit. Right now, 11th in rush efficiency. I think that's a little bit wonky and skewed based upon the 2-game sample. I know that the Giants ran well in the opener against Tennessee. That tailed off a little bit against the Panthers, and if you look at yards before first contact, it would indicate that Saquon was a magician in week 1 against the Titans. You see why his numbers tailed off a little bit in week 2, and you see why he was Superman in week 1, where he was number 1 in rush yards over expectation against the Titans. So I don't know if that can continue a little bit, but it'd be nice to at least be able to move the pile 3-4 yards a pop just to set up Daniel Jones with some easier situations where he's not, sitting in these known passing situations and the Cowboys can just pin their ears back and get after the quarterback. You look, I think, at the Cowboys defense, again, the run metrics look okay, but I think we touched on this a little bit heading into the Tampa game, is the personnel on the interior of the defensive line isn't necessarily the best. And so I think that's key, that the Giants have to be able to run the ball a little bit here, specifically up the middle, to create some situations for Daniel Jones where he's in 3rd and 3 or 3rd and 4, and Brian Daboll has the entire playbook at his disposal, and you can get Daniel Jones's legs in some scripted situations in some of those short yardage instances.
Yeah, the pressure rate the Giants' offensive line is allowing, not great, Bob. Not great at all when you look at the strength of the O-line. Andrew Thomas has been outstanding. Evan Neal struggling to adjust to life in the National Football League. Clearly a game where these two teams know each other well. They play twice a year. It's one of the bigger rivalries. Unfortunately, there hasn't been much at stake. A little bit of a changing role here with the Giants, as we said, potentially closing as the favorite for the first time in an eternity. To echo Payne's sentiments, always so difficult to try and address, a game where the market has moved as much as it has, as we've seen money come in on the underdog and money on the under as well. All right, my good man, anything else you want to add to the Giants-Cowboys handicap, or have we done enough damage for a Monday morning?
That's everything, bud.
All right, you empty the tank. Proud of you as always. So for all of us here around these Bet the Board parts, thank you guys for tuning in every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday throughout the course of the season. We'll be right back with you on Wednesday as Brad Powers steps in to break down the college football slate as we finally get into some meaningful conference games. We can put the non-con schedule to bed. And, of course, NFL full breakdowns for the marquee matchups on Thursday. Best of luck with all of your investments in tonight's Monday Night Football game between the Cowboys and Giants, and hopefully we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.